Okay, so we began last week to discuss the creation of the human being. We're going to conclude it for a few reasons. First of all, we didn't discuss everything that's in this verse alone, but also the story continues in chapter 2 of Genesis. So one way to think about it is that in chapter 1, the Torah discusses the creation in general terms, but then the Torah gets more specific in the story of creation. It's reiterated and discussed in greater detail in chapter 2. So we're still on the topic of creation of man. So just to discuss a few more points that we did not conclude last week, and about the creation of man. If you look at the beginning of the sixth day, right? What was created on sixth day? Sixth day, you have the animals, mammals, and human beings. And they're both created on the sixth day. So obviously there's some connection between the two. In some sense, the human being is like an animal in some sense, certainly the body, certainly the biological perspective. So if you look at verse 24, chapter 1, verse 24, where the Torah introduces day number 6, it says, Vayomer Elokim, God said, Totzeh ha'aretz nefesh chaya lemina. Let the earth give forth a living soul. And then it continues, Behema, animals, remes, crawling creatures, and beasts, lemina, to its kind, and it was so. So it's interesting. What do we see here? We see that in the beginning of the introduction of day 6, who's supposed to create the nefesh chaya, the living being? It's the earth, right? It says the earth should give forth the living being. So you would expect that to mean all living beings, including the human being. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't include the human being, because when it comes to the creation of the human being, and the human being is also a living being, there it says that Hashem himself has to create. So what does this tell us? In other words, if you read 24 and you just said, let the earth give forth a living being, nefesh chaya, which is, by the way, the same words that the Torah uses for the creation of the human being, I'm pretty sure. If we go look at chapter 2, look at chapter 2, verse 7. Hashem Elohim formed man, earth, dust from the earth. He blew into his nostrils a living soul. Vayhi ha'adam, man became nefesh chaya, living being. The same word that is in the beginning of day 6, that the earth should give forth the nefesh chaya, now appears in chapter 2, verse 7, when Hashem creates man and blows into his nostrils a breath of life, and man becomes a nefesh chaya. So you see the same word for the beginning of day 6 for mammals and animals is what the Torah uses for the human being. So this leads to the question: who gives forth the human being, or the soul of the living being? So here's the difference between the animals and the human being. The animals, they get their soul from the earth. That's what the verse says. Totzeh ha'aretz, let the earth give forth not just the body of the animal, but also the soul of the animal comes from the earth. When it comes to the human being, however, here the soul of the human being comes from God himself. But what does it mean that the earth gives forth the soul? I understand the earth represents matter, earth gives the body, but what does it mean that earth gives the soul? So some opinions say as follows: we're telling you the difference between the soul of man and the soul of the animal. Soul of the animal, even though it's a soul, but it comes from nature. It's trapped by the laws of nature, which is why the animal is trapped by its instinct. That's why day number 6, you could say, let the earth give forth the soul, because what soul are we talking about? We're talking about a natural soul. And the natural soul gives life to the animals. It gives it the desire to live, the desire for pleasure, etc., and it gives it its personality. But it comes from the earth, meaning it's natural. Natural means it cannot transcend itself. It cannot escape its own instincts. The human being, however, does not get his soul from the earth. The human being gets his body from the earth, but not his soul from the earth. The human being's body is limited to the laws of nature, but his soul is not, which connects to what we discussed on Thursday and Friday. Thursday about this past week's parsha about the red heifer, how the red heifer represents the idea that the body, even though the body is mortal, even though the body is limited, but the soul is not. And here you have this in the story of creation, where the animal, the soul of the animal comes from the earth, but the soul of man does not come from the earth, meaning it's higher than nature. So that's sort of introduction when we begin to discuss the creation of the human being on day number 6, the afternoon of day number 6. Okay, what's the mission statement of a human being? If I ask you, God, if you're God and you're speaking to somebody, you're consulting, we discussed this last week. God says, let us make man. Rashi says he's consulting with the angels. If you have to say we're going to make man, what's the mission statement? What's the I don't know what they call it. How do you describe why you want to create man? What is man? What's the mission statement of man? If you have to convince somebody, if you have to write one sentence and convince somebody to create a human being, what would you say? The Torah says something that seems, if you read it literally, it seems very, very strange. Says the verse, Yomer Elokim, I'm reading chapter 1, verse 26. I'm sorry, I can't see it. Yeah, it is 26. Yomer Elokim, God says, Nasa Adam, let us make man, in our image, in our likeness. And here's the human being. You ready? You ready what the human being is going to do? He's going to, I don't know, he's going to help people. No. The Yirdu, they will rule B'gat Hayam, in the sea in the fish of the sea, and in the birds, and in the animals, and in the entire earth, and all the creeping creatures that crawl on the earth. So this is the human being. What's the human being? The human being will rule over all the animals. Beautiful. That's why we need the human being to be the zookeeper, right? That's what it seems like. It seems like what's the superiority? Why do we need a human being? Well, there's a jungle, there's animals running all over. We need a zookeeper. So we need a zookeeper. Let's create the human being. Wow, wonderful. What a mission statement. The human species as zookeepers. So the simple meaning is strange. You could read a simple meaning as a person has permission to rule over the animals, but it should come later in the narrative. Here's like God saying, it's unbelievable. We're going to create man. And what's man going to do? Oh, what's man going to do? Man is going to rule over the animals. It's like, okay, so is there anything better that the human being is supposed to do? Is there something more lofty, more spiritual? So here is where Hasidic interpretation comes in and says that what does it mean? What does it mean to rule? What does it mean we're going to rule over the animals? And in short, what they're saying is that the purpose of the human being is not just for himself or herself. The purpose of the human being is to bring meaning to the entire universe, and including the animals, but the animals is a metaphor for everything else, everything in the world. What is the purpose of creation? The purpose of creation is that you have an entire world. And once the world is ready, then the human being comes and rules over the animals and rules over the existence. And what does rule mean? Rule means you subjugate it to your values, not to your ego, but to your values. And therefore, from the perspective of the Kabbalah, ruling over the animals means bringing holiness into the entire world, into the animals. When you use the animal for a holy purpose, you are ruling over the animals. Ruling means you subjugate them to your set of values, to your purpose. And in some sense, the man is on top of the hierarchy, in other words, top of the food chain. But top of the food chain is not just physically for survival, but it's also spiritually. It is his responsibility to rule, but to rule is to subjugate the creations to his higher values. So in a sense, he's elevating all the creatures that are below him that were created in the first 6 days. And the human being elevates them to his own purpose, which is the service of God. Meaning, everybody in the food chain serves the form of life that is higher than him. Even the human being. So all creation serves the human being, and this human being serves God. Right? So in other words, everybody you always elevate the thing below you. The animal eats the grass. Now the grass moves from vegetation to animal life. The human being eats the animal is elevated to become a human being, because the animal now becomes part of the human being's bloodstream. And then when the human being does a mitzvah or studies Torah or connects to God, it becomes godly, now the human becomes godly. So everything is elevated, everything in the hierarchy, in the food chain of the universe, also the spiritual food chain, is supposed to elevate the creations that are below him or her. And that is the meaning of rule over the fish, rule over the animals. It doesn't mean that you decide that they're here to serve you. To the contrary, it means that you, in some sense, have a responsibility, not only for yourself, but responsibility for the creations that you come in contact with, that you should rule them, meaning subjugate them to your purpose, which is to serve the service of God. And if you read it this way, now we understand how this verse is not just permission for the human being to go hunting. What it is it's the responsibility. The human being's responsibility is not only to himself, but to the entire world, to all the creations in the world. The human being has to elevate every part of the creation. And that's why we say, why should we create man? Nasa Adam, right? We said verse 24. Verse 26. God was saying, what's the purpose of the human being? We have a perfect world, right? So many people walk around thinking that the world would be a much nicer place without the human beings. If you look around, you see a lot of the trouble is caused by the human beings. Had there been no human beings, there would be no trouble. So why do we need the human beings? So the answer is, if there were no human beings, everything in the world would be physical and natural. And the purpose of the human being is actually to elevate all the other animals, all the other creatures, all the other creations to the human being's purpose, which is the service of God. That is how the Kabbalists read verse 27. And that's why it's so important to tell you the first thing, what's the purpose of creation? To rule over the other animals. If rule just means to dominate them, then what's the point? But if rule means to subjugate them to your purpose, now we understand, now this is meaningful.
Rabbi, this is such a funny choice of word for rule, subjugate. There's other words for rule in Hebrew that don't have the implication of some kind of aggressive domination, because that's what it comes across as an English speaker, that there's this thing that was so good that God created, and then man was not so good. He was not, didn't get that double, what do you call it, star. It just, the choice of words leads you away from the Kabbalistic interpretation.
Okay, so now I have to defend the Kabbalists. Here we go. For 2 points. First of all, there's another word that the Torah uses later to describe the conquering the earth, the kivshuhat, to conquer the earth. So that is a little bit more aggressive, could be a little more aggressive. We could discuss that. We could discuss that now, but it comes later. So let's discuss that word. And then we'll talk about the word that we use here, which is a much less common word for ruling over. It's v'yirdu, comes from the word lirdot. Lirdot is it's not a common word in the Bible. It does exist in other places. In fact, it also appears in the parsha we read yesterday, in Balak's words, so it's more poetic. Balaam is talking about how the kings of David are going to rule. It uses the word vayerd. It also, King David in the book of Psalms uses the word, but it's not a common word for rulership. Vayerd. We'll talk about that in a minute. But before that, I want to go to the more common word that the Torah is going to use later, and that is kivshua, conquer it. And when we think of conquest, because I don't know why, because we're a product of all the conquests of humanity, we think of aggression. But the truth of the matter is that when the Torah uses conquest, conquest is not destruction. There's a clear difference between conquering something and destroying it. To conquer is to really use it for your purpose. That's what conquering is, at least in the biblical sense. There's other form of conquest. You conquer a land and you destroy it because you don't want the opposition. That's not conquest. That's destruction. You have different words for that. So it's clear that from the perspective of the Torah, to conquer something doesn't mean to destroy it. It means to use it for your purpose. And in this context, the human being has to use all of creation for his purpose. What's his purpose? Not necessarily pleasure, not necessarily, certainly not for destructive purpose, certainly not for destructive, just to destroy, but for the purpose. And what's the purpose of the human being? Purpose of the human being is not to serve the human being. I mean, it's to serve the human being so the human being could then serve God. So that's just the word of conquest. You have to differentiate between conquering and between destroying. And the conquering is not destroying. If you destroy it, if you destroy it, or even if you don't allow that the conquered to express itself, then it's not conquest. It's imprisonment. It's enslavement. There are different words. Conquest would mean that you allow it to exist, but you're the ruler. Meaning to say, it exists, it does what it's supposed to do, but it does so for a higher purpose. In this context, spiritually speaking, the higher purpose is the service of holiness. Now, I just want to talk about this word for a second, v'yirdu. The rabbis understand that it's an uncommon word. And in fact, the root of the word vayerd could be similar to another word that sounds similar, phonetically similar, is yarad, yirida, descent. Descent means going down. To rule, the same word sounds, it's phonetically similar. To rule, v'yirdu, literally could also, in other words, the word for going down, descending, sounds very similar to that word. To the extent that if you don't know Hebrew, if you don't know biblical Hebrew, if you stop someone in Tel Aviv and say, what does v'yirdu mean? They're going to say it means go down. So there was this Hasidic song, and based on that has a verse from the book of Psalms, Vayerd miyam ad yam, which means that when the Mashiach will rule from sea to sea. And it's a beautiful Hasidic song. But there was a guy that came from Israel. He didn't know the biblical Hebrew. He just knew the modern Hebrew. He said, I don't like this song. They said, why not? What a beautiful song. Mashiach will rule from sea to sea. A beautiful song, beautiful song. So he says, yeah, but why do you have to mention descent? We're singing an uplifting spiritual song. Why are you talking about descent? Of course, the verse doesn't say descent. The verse talks about ruling. And the words just sound similar. So the rabbis understand that the Torah uses a word that could mean rule, but it could also mean descent. And this is what they say. It depends. If the human being is meritorious, in other words, if he does the right thing, then he will rule over the animals. But if the human being is not meritorious, if he does not live up to his ideals or his purpose, then not only will he not rule over the animals, but actually the animals are ruling over the animals will lead to his descent, meaning to say moral descent, meaning to say that the human being can actually become worse than the animals. And this is what the rabbis realized, Jill's point. When you conquer something, it can be in a way of an aggressive way, where you are being destructive, and you're imprisoning the conquered, and you're destroying the conquered. If that's the case, you're in fact worse than the animals, because the animals are just living out their instincts. If you watch any of the videos online, how lions going hunting. I just watched one last night. I don't know how it got to my thing, but it got to my thing. And you have 500 comments, and everybody is screaming at the lion how terrible the lions are. 2 lions against 1 buffalo. It's not fair. And 500 comments. Nobody could sleep at night because the animal is conquering the other animal. And it's nice to see that people have compassion, but the truth of the matter is that the animal has no choice. The lion has no choice. It has to survive its instincts. It can't become vegetarian. So the point of the matter is the animal is not bad. But if the human being now descends and becomes a beast of prey, then the human being actually descended. So in other words, the Torah itself understands that the ability to rule over the animals, which is broadly speaking, it's the ability that we have the wisdom to rule over the entire earth. It can either mean rulership, which means we elevate the creation to our values, to our purpose, or it means if we abuse that power, then actually what happens is v'yirdu, we actually descend. We descend lower than all the other creatures, because all the other creatures are just following their nature. And we, however, have our free choice. So the point here is that in the creation of man, in the first verse, you have to say, what's the definition of man? God uses a word, the Torah uses a word that has a double meaning. It could mean positive, it could be negative. What's the story of man? Who's going to write the definition of the human being? Only the human being can write the definition. We don't know. And it's fascinating that if you read the story of the creation of man, it does not say, and God saw that it was good. Every other creation, it says, except for Tuesday, except for Monday, but then Tuesday says twice for Monday. At the end of the day, once Tuesday hits, every other creation says God saw that it was good. when it comes to the human being, it doesn't say God saw that it was good. At the conclusion of the day, it says that God saw that everything he did was very good. We'll discuss that later. But it doesn't say anywhere that the human being is good. Why not? What? The animals are good, the mosquitoes are good, the elephants are good, everybody is good except for the human being? The answer is, we don't know if the human being is good. Who decides if the human being is good? The human being decides if the human being is good. All the other creations, God sees that they're good. But the human being, we're silent. We don't know. Maybe the human being is good. Maybe the human being is not good. It's not up to God. It's up to the human being. And that's beautiful that in the first verse that we describe, where God says, the Torah describes, God says, let us make man. And then you have to say, what's the definition of man? Well, the next word, v'yirdu. Either they rule over the creation, rule in the positive sense, or they descend lower than the rest of creation. And that's the beauty of the human story. We have to write our own story. We don't know if we're good. It's up to us. But we have the power to rule over everything else, rule over in the positive sense. We need to say, subjugate everything to us, not us to our purpose. What's the purpose of us? To subjugate our own life to something higher, to the service of God. But it's not just for us. It's also we elevate all of creation. That's the positive. And the negative would be the yirdu. We become more beastly than the beasts. And if we do that, then the yirdu, the word v'yirdu means not ruling, but it means descent. And that's Rashi right here. Rashi right here on verse 26. He says, Yesh b'lashon hazeh, this expression, they should rule over the fish. This expression could be lashon ridui, could be the expression of rulership, or lashon yirida, or a language of descent, going down. Zacha, if the person merits, rodeh b'chayotu be'emot, he could rule over the animals. Lo zacha, if a person does not merit, nasa yarud lifneim, person is lower than the animals, and the beast will rule over the human being, either literally or figuratively. The Hasidic interpretation always says that the word zacha, if he merits, what does it mean if he merits? If he merits, then he rules. The Hasidic interpretation says the word zacha, merit, comes from the word zach, refined. If a person refines himself, then he could elevate the animals. If a person does not refine himself, then he's lower than the animals. So that's the story of the human being. Sorry for ruining your morning. Sorry for not telling you that the human being is tov, is good. We don't know if the human being is good. That's not up to the Torah. That's up to us. This is the story of the first verse, at least part of the first verse of the creation of the human being.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. Now, there is a certain defect. I don't know. There's a certain problem within the human being, and the human being. The problem with the human being is that people are created and they think that they have a certain sense of narcissism. Even the most healthy person is not a narcissist, but in some sense, a person feels like I am the center of the universe. That's just natural. I'm the only one. Everybody is here to serve me. That's how you feel. If you don't feel that way, speak to your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old. They certainly feel that way. And when you get older, you get more sophisticated. You just get smarter in hiding that, in hiding the fact that, the baby is not shy to tell everybody, you all have to serve me. And therefore, if I'm hungry at 2 o'clock in the morning, nobody else can sleep. Baby is not shy. But the truth is the adult is not shy either. The adult also feels that way. It's just the adult is too sophisticated to say it. But sometimes the adult acts that way. That's the way we are. We think in our psyche, even though logically we know it's not so, but logically we say, look, how my perspective, my subjective perspective is the entire world was created for me. And the commentaries explain, remember we offered many interpretations last week in the fact that we said man was created in the image of God. So one interpretation of man was created in the image of God is that just like God is one, the human being also feels that he is the center of the universe. And that is not, narcissism is when it gets out of control. But spiritually speaking, that is actually a positive. Why is that a positive? Because in some sense, it is true. In some sense, the purpose of creation could not be fulfilled without you giving your unique contribution. And in that sense, you're really the most important in what is necessary from you. You have your little part of the story is critical. Without your part of the story is not going to go anywhere. If you think about if you have to make a mission to space, a mission to Mars, a mission to the moon, and if you have one component missing in the spaceship, it could be a multi-billion-dollar project. One little component that's worth $6.50. If you miss one screw, the whole thing can come crumbling down. And in some sense, that's the way God sees the world, that every human being is contribution. Every human being's purpose and contribution is critical, not only for himself or herself, but for the entire story of creation. And in that sense, the fact that I feel that I was created and I am the center, and I am the center is because indeed, spiritually speaking, you are the center. Your friend is also the center, but that's another story. That's his business or her business. That's not your business. And that's another detail. And the reason why we're talking about this is because if you look at verse 27, all the good stuff come out when you find the grammatical bumps. Verse 27 has a big grammatical bump. Vayivra Elokim, God created the man, B'Tselmo, in his image. B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, Bara Oto, he created him. Zachar u'Nekeva, male and female, Bara Otam, he created them. So we have a big problem here. 27 is grammatically flawed verse, a grammatically flawed verse. Why so? Because if you can pick it up by yourself is even better. But we're on Zoom, so I'll spill the beans. The first it says, in the image of God, he created him. What is him? Singular, masculine. Tselem Elokim bara oto, he created him. One person, Adam, and singular. And then the verse continues, Zachar u'Nekeva, male and female, he created them. So first of all, you have male and female, but you have plural. So did he create singular or did he create plural? Did he create one human being or multiple human beings? So this is a big problem. This verse is a big problem. The simple reading is very simple. Here, we're talking about generally speaking. And generally speaking, we know that first Adam was created. And then in chapter 2, we'll talk about the creation of Eve. So he says God created him, meaning Adam. And then later, the verse says, don't worry, eventually male and female were also created, but we're just sort of hinting to you of what we're going to discuss in the future. Okay, that's one interpretation. Rashi doesn't like the interpretation. Rashi brings a strange medrash. When Rashi brings a medrash, it means that the verse is so difficult to understand that there's no simple interpretation of the verse. You have to run to the medrash. So this just shows this is a real problem, and we have to fall back on the medrash. Medrash is a non-literal translation, but sometimes that's what you need to do. But I just said this here is because in some sense, God created male and female. God created plural. But on the other hand, the verse starts, God created him. Him is singular. So how could that both be? Because both Adam and Eve feel that God created him alone. Every individual person feels that God created only me, because every individual in their psyche feels that I'm the center and everybody else is here to serve me. And like we said, that is not a spiritual defect. That is actually a spiritual gift, because that means that I have my responsibility to the correction of the universe, and I can't outsource it to somebody else. I can't say enough that 7.5 billion people will fulfill their purpose, and I'll just sail through life not thinking about my purpose. Say no. God created you with the perspective that you are the center of the universe, because that's supposed to lead you to understand that indeed you are the center of the universe, and therefore the responsibility of fulfilling your purpose lies upon you alone from your perspective.
Rabbi,
Okay.
isn't
Yes.
there a problem just with the grammar of Hebrew? Because there's no neutral tense, and not tense, but there's no neutral. And therefore, instead of being able to say God created mankind, which is a neutral, and then he created male and female, that's what it is. So there's no contradiction.
Okay, I would agree with you, except that the verse says he created him. If the verse just said, Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'Tselmo, God created man in his image, then you would argue that man is not the individual man. Man is humankind. I have no problem with that. I'm totally fine with that. The problem is that the verse continues, B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, he created him. Him is the problem. Is the problem.
It's singular. It's singular, I see.
Singular, that's the problem. Bara oto. And then, Zachar u'Nekeva, male and female, bara otam, he created them. So it's dancing all around. If it would say just what it says in the beginning, God created ha-Adam. So you could say Adam is Adam. You could say Adam could mean the individual. It's funny because in Hebrew, the word Adam could mean Adam, it could mean human being, and it could mean humanity. It could mean all three. So I have no question about ha-Adam. But then it says, Bara Oto created him. that is where the problem begins. Who created him? Him is clearly masculine and singular. Okay, so I'm just warning you that the Medrash is coming. The Medrash is a little out there, a little strange, but that's what we do. We do strange Medrashim too, especially the ones that Rashi quotes. If Rashi quotes it, we have no choice but to study it. So of course we're going to put out the Medrash. It sounds a little fanciful, but then we're going to have to discuss the deep truth and the deep psychological truth that lies behind this Medrash. And here we go. Okay, says Rashi as follows. Again, the problem is that at first it says that he created him, single, male and single, and then it says male and female, he created them, plural. So which one is it? So Rashi asks a question. It's very funny. Rashi gives two interpretations. First, he gives the Medrash, and then he gives a simple interpretation. That's different than Rashi's usual style. Rashi usually first gives the simple interpretation and then brings the Medrash. The order is very important. Certainly the way the Rebbe taught us to learn Rashi. The order of Rashi's interpretations are very important. And therefore Rashi usually first brings the simple interpretation and then brings the Medrash. In this case, the simple interpretation is a good interpretation, but it's still hard. The simple interpretation has more questions than answers, and therefore the simple interpretation comes second. So it's very interesting that we bring the Medrash first, and then the second simple interpretation is second. And this is unusual for Rashi. Why do we do so? Because the question is a very big question. And even the simple interpretation does not answer the question. So the question is we'll read Rashi in order. Says Rashi as follows. Lahalan, further it says, Vayikach achat mitzalotav, that he took one of his, I don't want to, people translate it as ribs, but we know it doesn't mean ribs, it means sides. So later, in other words, in chapter 2, it describes the creation as God creating Adam, and then from Adam, after Adam is already alive, from Adam, he takes part of Adam and creates Eve. So how does it tell me here, verse 27, how does the verse say that he created them, meaning plural, if we know the two weren't created yet? Sorry, Rashi's coming into this discussion from a different problem. Rashi's problem, and Rashi's discussing, why does it say male and female created them if there's no female till chapter 2? There's no female till chapter 2. It should just say him, singular male. There's no female till chapter 2. So what does it say? He created them, male and female. So therefore, Rashi asks the question further. It says he took one of his sides, etc. And there, chapter 2, the Torah describes how God creates Eve from Adam. So Rashi says, the Medrash Agada, there's a Medrash that says as follows, that in the beginning, he created him, but it was two faces. In other words, it was male and female attached. And the Medrash explains that. Rashi doesn't quote this Medrash, but the Medrash explains that they were attached back to back. So you had one being that was both male and female. And then God divided them. So verse chapter 2, when it says that God puts Adam to sleep and takes a side of Adam and creates Eve, it doesn't mean that he creates Eve out of a. In other words, Eve was already existed. It's just a surgery that connects the two creations that were created, that were stuck together back to back. That's what the Medrash says. Now, how does this help us? This helps the grammar as very simple. First, it's the same verse could say he created him, meaning to say singular, and yet it could say male and female, created them in the plural. So which one was it? Were they one person, or was it male and female in the plural? The answer is it was two people attached as one. That's what the Medrash says. It's a strange Medrash. We'll talk about it. But first then Rashi continues and offers Pshuta Shel Mikra. What's the simple meaning of the verse? The simple meaning of the verse is Kan Hadiacha. In this verse, the Torah signals to you, it tells you that they were created, both male and female were created on the sixth day. But here, the Torah does not explain how they were created, and it will be explained later in chapter 2. In other words, this is what we started with. This verse 27, is talking about the story in general. And the story in general is true. Male and female, he created them. How did he create them? Well, we have to read chapter 2, and you'll see the details. The details is that first he created Adam, and then from Adam he created Eve. But that is the specifics. Verse 27, according to the simple meaning, is the generality. He created him, that's true. By the way, he also created them plural because Eve was also created on the sixth day. So that's the simple meaning. But Rashi somehow doesn't feel the simple meaning is so great because the verse does say that he created them. And the verse, you're going to tell me that the verse now relies that you'll, in other words, the verse is referring to something that will be said later. Rashi has, it's difficult. So Rashi falls back on the Medrash, and the Medrash says that male and female were created together as one being, and then they were separated. And that's the story that we're going to read about later, the creation of Eve. So Eve was created together with Adam, but later they were separated. So this brings up a whole host of questions. First of all, are we talking literally or figuratively? It's strange that Adam and Eve were created together. The other problem is, if God wants Adam and Eve to be separate, they should be created separate. Why are they created together and then separated? Right? It sounds like, well, there was a defect. God forgot. Sometimes, God forbid, Siamese twins are born together. I guess that's some sort of defect. So you're going to say that God created Adam and Eve there was a mistake, there was a defect. They were created together, and then they have to be separated. If they have to be separated, separate them as two. If you want them to be one, make them one. What is this idea that first he creates them as one, and then he creates them as two? So these are the issues that this Medrash that Rashi quotes raises. Okay, we'll learn the rest next week. No, I'm kidding.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
It seems to me, and the grammatical differences came earlier in verse 26 when it said, "Let us make man," and it's the plural. To me, it suggests that in discussing man and his creation, he's already showing, that built into man and the creation of man is freedom of choice. That God knows what he's doing, but it's up to you to figure out what the end is. It's a crossword puzzle where you have to figure out which letters go in, and you can either posit the right way or err and make a wrong decision about it. But that all the answers are not being spoon-fed by God. That this is his intention, and it's part of man's duty to kind of figure out the details.
I agree. It's part of man. In other words, man is the only creation that writes his own story. In other words, creation of all the other creations in the first 6 days is complete. The Torah tells you the whole story. And the Torah tells you, like we mentioned before, Torah tells you that it was good. The human being is not good. Why is he not good? Not because he's bad, but because we don't know. The story is not over yet. How could you say, day 4, the story of the sun is good. The sun is good. Whatever it's doing, it's fine. Day 5, the animals are doing what they're doing. They're fine, right? But day 6, day 5 is the fish in the verse. Day 6 in the morning is the animals. Human being, is the human being good? We don't know. Because the story is not done yet.
And that the inconsistencies were placed purposefully to ensure
that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Okay, now we have to go to the Kabbalah, because all the Kabbalah needs, trust me, is a medrash like this, and they're happy, because this is just good material. You could run with this forever if this is good stuff. So let's start with the idea of, what do we want to start with? Oh, male and female, right? It's very interesting. The first thing that we talk about the human being, the first thing we say is, in other words, in God's plan. Remember, 26 is God's plan, and 27 is the actual creation. So in God's plan, the big idea, we're going to create man. It's going to be unbelievable. What's man? Man is going to rule over the animals. Man is going to be the zookeeper. So we explain what that means. What's man? Man is amazing. Why is man amazing? Because man has the potential to elevate all of the rest of creation, right? So God is not just interested in man. We say it every day in the prayer 3 times, that God's compassion is upon all the creations. God loves all his creations. But that's why God says, let us make man, because man impacts all of creations. Man allows the rest of creation to reach its purpose. Because eventually, if the lower forms of life serve the higher forms of life, and the higher form of life serves God, then everything is elevated. Okay, fine. So that's in God's plan. What do we learn about in the actual creation? The first thing we know, male and female. So let's talk about male and female for a minute. It doesn't say that God created the hippopotamus male and female. It doesn't say it. Why doesn't it say it? Because it doesn't have to say it. Why doesn't it have to say it? Because the verse says, limino, to its kind, to its species, meaning to say that they were created in a way that they would be able to perpetuate the species. And therefore, you don't have to say male and female, because biologically we know there's male and female if it says limino, that they're going to create the whole species. So in order to perpetuate the species, you're going to have male and female. Fine, that's enough. So therefore, all the other creations, all the other animals, it doesn't say male and female. What it does say, it says limino, to its kind. Keep saying limino, to its kind. And that would mean that this creation is not a one-time creation, but this is a creation that has the power to procreate. By the way, it uses that same term with the vegetation, that all the fruit and all the seeds, everything is limino, to its kind, meaning to say that it's not that God created a tree, but God creates the tree to be able to perpetuate its existence through giving seed to other trees, etc. So in the idea of reproduction is not new in verse 27. It happens in all life, beginning from Tuesday and Thursday and Friday morning. It all keeps saying limino, to its species, to its kind, which means to perpetuate life, which obviously includes male and female. So I don't have to say male and female because we know it exists already. In other words, it's included in the mina, into its kind. Verse 27, ladies and gentlemen, we say male and female. What's the news? Why do you have to say that Adam and Eve were created male and female? We understand. Just say God created humanity to its kind. We'll know it means male and female. So here's the deep idea. Here's the idea that the Kabbalists say for animals, for most animals, Jill is here, so Jill will correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm generalizing, if I'm not generalizing. Most animals, in other words, in biology, the purpose of male and female is just to perpetuate life, just to allow biologically for life to be recreated. That's why you have male and female in animal life. But when it comes to the human being, if the whole purpose of the unity between male and female is just for procreation, then you don't have to emphasize that they're male and female. Just say for its kind. Remember, this is the first verse. We're saying this is what the human being is. And here we say male and female. And what are we saying? We're saying that the relationship of male and female is much broader than just for procreation. For the human being really to discover their full potential, you're going to need the relationship between male and female to be done properly in a wholesome way. And the tool to be able to fulfill your potential is through the male and female relationship. So by saying, Zachar and Nekeva Abraham, he created them male and female, it's not just a biological statement, it's a psychological and spiritual statement. That's point number one. And it's fascinating that when it says in verse 27, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them, right? That's what it says. God created man in the image of God. Right after that, what does it say? Male and female, he created them. So some people read this verse as follows. The way you get to the image of God that's within you, how do you tap in? Everybody has the image of God within them. But how do you tap into the image of God within you when you have a proper relationship between male and female? And then there's different ways of playing in that, because first of all, the power to procreate is godly, but also the power to transcend oneself and to connect to something greater than self. That's the essence of spirituality, as we discussed in the past many times, that the more physical the thing is, the more planted and rooted the thing is in its place. If you have a stone, the stone is the most physical. Why? It can't go anywhere. It's stuck in its place. The tree is more spiritual. Why is the tree more spiritual? Because it could transcend, it can grow, it could change, it could evolve, it can grow. The animal is more spiritual than the tree because the tree is rooted in one place, and the animal could roam. If you can roam, means you can go beyond your own nature or your own place. You could move places. You're not locked into one physical space. And ultimately, the human being is the one who's the most spiritual, because with our intelligence, we could actually transcend ourselves. We could connect to something. We can connect to something that opposes us. We can understand something we disagree with. We can become spiritual, which is completely beyond our own capacity. So the point here is that the more you can transcend yourself, the more spiritual you are. And the greatest way where transcendence is possible is in the male-female relationship, where a person could really become one with someone outside of him, and that is the most godly thing we can do. So this is the idea that male and female are written right after in the image of God, because how do you tap into the image of God within you is through male and female. I've said this many times before, but it's a beautiful teaching. that the Gemara says that Ish v'Isha, if man and woman merit this, the divine presence is between them. In other words, in their relationship. And we said that Ish, the Gemara says that Ish is fire. The letters for Ish, man, is Aleph Shin, fire. Letters for Isha, woman, is Aleph Shin, meaning fire. And the man has a Yud and the woman has Hey. In other words, each of them has 3 letters. 2 of those letters make the word fire. And the third letter, man has the Yud, woman has Hey. Together it makes the name of God. So in other words, it's harder for me to tap into the name of God within myself until I tap into the name of God within you. And together we can discover the name of God in both of us. That's basically the story of marriage and how we get to the image of God. But that doesn't explain what the Medrash that says that they're created as one and then they're separate. What does that mean? What does it mean that male and female are created as one and then they separate? So they separate. So there are different interpretations. I'll go with the one I like, even though I don't know if this is the real one, but it's the one that I like. What's the one I like? It says like this. This is not a story about Adam and Eve. This is a story about every relationship between male and female. Every relationship happens the same way. And that is that male and female have a relationship, but I can't speak for the females, so somebody else will speak for the females, I'll speak for the males. So from the perspective of the male, the female is back to back. What does it mean back to back? Back to back means we're one. It's wonderful, we're one. But if we're one, it means that you're an extension of me, meaning to say, why are you here? You're here to serve me. So I love this relationship. I get a lot from it, even if I give a lot. But the reason why I give and the reason why I'm here is because of primarily it makes me a better person. I get pleasure. It's all about me. So you're here, but you're an extension of me. So I need to go out to dinner. I need someone to talk to, so you're in my life. I need someone to laugh at my jokes. So I take you to dinner so you can laugh at my joke, etc., etc., etc. So we have a deep relationship. Male and female, each one is a full being. But from the perspective of the male, at least, in an immature relationship, in other words, in the beginning, that's the way it is. It's just one. I am the center. I exist. You're here to enhance my existence. So it's wonderful. I do things for you. Whatever I do for you, that's fine. But you're here to enhance my existence. That's the stage one. That's when male and female, in the psyche of the male and female are one, and they're back to back. Back to back means I don't see you as a person. I just see you as someone who is going to enhance me. So I don't even see your face. I'm one with you, but I don't see you as an independent person with your own independent needs. Then the relationship matures. And the relationship matures, what happens is there's the surgery. What's the surgery? All of a sudden, God separates male and female. And now, from the perspective of the male, say, wow, the male is in shock. Could you imagine Adam and Eve? They were one if they were back to back. Then Adam goes to sleep. Then he wakes up. And then he says, oh, wow, I discovered there's a new person living here. What do you mean? It's frightening. What do you mean it was frightening? You always knew there was a new person. There was another person in your apartment. You always knew you had a roommate. Yeah, but that person wasn't an independent person. That person was just here to enhance me. Now you're telling me that, oh, the person has their own perspective. The person has their own needs. Now the honeymoon is over. Now there's conflict. So that's the story of that's the story of every relationship. In the beginning, there is the fact that we're back to back. We see ourselves as one. It's not as it's not as positive as it seems. In fact, and it's, by the way, there's no possibility of conflict. You can't fight with the woman if she's back to back one with you, right? When couples fall in love, they don't fight. Why don't they fight? Because why would I fight? You're here. You're serving me. Why would I fight with you? You're like my limb. Why would my right hand fight with my left hand? So even if you want to do something that I want to do while we're in love, we're just one. So there's no purpose to fight because you're part of me. You're an extension of me. What happens when you wake up from the dream? That's really what the story is, where God puts Adam and Eve to sleep. What does it mean to put them to sleep? Puts them to sleep means it's signifying you're in a dream, and then you wake up and the honeymoon is over and you realize that the woman is not an extension of yourself, but not back to back, but face to face. Now you're someone that could be opposite you, someone who has their own identity. Oh, now there can be possibility for conflict. Now there's also possibility for a true relationship, right? When it's back to back, it's immature. It's not a true relationship. If you're here to serve me, it's not a real relationship. A real relationship is if you're your own independent person. The price to pay for a real relationship is that conflict is possible. When your person is in love, in other words, when a person is blinded by love, there's no conflict, there's no possibility for conflict. but there's no possibility for a mature relationship. And that's why the verse says male and female. Oh, yes, of course. They're one, but they're two. Okay. So if that's the case, why does God create us one to begin with? So here's where the Kabbalists say, because the only way we can overcome the conflict between male and female, essentially, in the root soul, they are one. They're one, they separate, and because they were one in their source, therefore they can reunite. If they were not one in their soul, then they would not be able to reunite. That's why you have to go through all these steps. You have to have the root soul where they are one. Male and female are two halves of the same soul. And the expression of that in a relationship is when I fall in love with somebody, then I feel like, wow, we're one and we are one. But the downside of that aspect of the relationship is that it's immature. Why is it immature? Because we're one, but we're back to back, meaning to say if we're one, then I feel you as just an extension of myself. If that's the case, you're just here to serve me, or you're here to enhance me, or you're here to give me wisdom, or you're here, whatever it is, you're here for me. I am the center. And in that sense, it's an expression of a deep truth that we're one, but that's not a mature relationship. The mature relationship is after we're one, we have to separate. And separate means I see you as your own person. And then there's a possibility for conflict. And then when we reunite as two people face to face, not back to back, then the relationship is much deeper. And then we can go back to the truth, which is ultimately we're really one. So we have to go from one to two to one. If you take out any step of that process, then the relationship is missing something. So it starts out with one, gets to two, and continues with one. And that's why in the story of creation, it starts with one. In our soul, we're one, and then it gets to two. And like Robert is going to tell you, what about the third step? Could male and female unite and become one again? I don't know. That's up to the male and female. God can't tell you that. All God can tell you is you start out with one, and then you get to two. You start out in your soul, you're one, and then down here you come two. You fall in love in your psyche, you're one, and then the honeymoon is over, and then you're two. That's what God can do. Beyond that, step number 3, which is the most important, most critical step, can only happen after the first 2 steps. Step number 3, Torah is silent about. Why? It's up to you. It's not up to God. So all that wisdom that we can elaborate upon, but you see that these are important concepts. All this is just based on that one problem in the verse, where the verse says, male and female, I created him in the singular, and then it says male and female created them. So is it 1 or is it 2? The answer is, well, like Rashi says, they start out as one back to back, they separate face to face. So now you have to ask yourself, okay, I'm not going to ask you the hard questions. I'll stop here. Where am I in my relationship? Am I in the stage where we're back to back? Am I in the stage where we're face to face? Am I in the stage where we're fighting face to face? Or am I in the stage that we're uniting face to face? And the Kabbalah has so much to say about this. According to the Kabbalah, every year, Rosh Hashanah, there's what they call the Nesira, the separating of Malchut, the feminine aspect, from the masculine aspect of God. And you have a separation, and that separation causes distance. But then that distance creates the reunification face to face. And if it's face to face, it's much deeper. So this is true on many levels, and that touches upon what Mark's email texted, that when you say male and female created him, it can also be a reference Kabbalistically to the masculine and feminine sphera, that they too unite. But they start out as one, they separate, and they reunite. So whatever we're saying here is true on multiple levels. So that's the story in short. If anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question or disagree or say no, say we're in love and we don't separate, whatever you want to say, now's a good time.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I have a question. Can we understand both verse 26 and 27 from a perspective of human being trying to understand his or her own soul and rule over the animal side of it in verse 26, and in verse 27 understand that both sides are present in each soul? But then that brings a question whether it can materialize only in female or male, and each have their own other sides of the soul.
Right.
Does Kabbalah talk about that?
I agree with you that this is really a story of this. The purpose of this story is to give the human being insight. But I think that it's probably easier to say that chapter 1, both 26 and 27, chapter 1 refers to the God's perspective, and chapter 2 refers to the human perspective. So again, I'm sure you could say what you're saying as well, but for me, it makes that's more consistent with the overall narrative. And there are many sources to tell me that. So in that perspective, from God's perspective, purpose of man is to elevate the rest of creation, and purpose, and from God's perspective, male and female essentially are really one. That's God's perspective. Once you get to the human perspective, once we start discussing the story, chapter 2, the human perspective, it's much more complicated, because it's not so simple that we rule over the animals. Sometimes the animals rule over us spiritually. In other words, we descend below the animals. It's not so simple that man and woman are one, and they either back to back or face to face. And that's not so simple they're one, because the Torah says, Ezer Kenegdai. God says he'll create the woman, and she'll be a help opposite him. Opposite him could have two meanings in Hebrew. Kenegdai could mean across, or it could mean opposing. So now, is this relationship going to be a place where people are across each other? And across is good, because then I see your face. Or is it a place of opposition? Because the fact that we're two separate entities now creates conflict. So I think that verse 20, in general, chapter 1 is more the ideal from God's perspective, and then how that plays out will be in chapter 2.
But it's
Right?
written, yeah, but
Go
it's
ahead.
written for
Yes.
us to understand our soul. So
Yeah, you
when it
have.
says rule over the animals, means you rule over the animalistic part of yourself. And when it says
Okay.
yeah,
Good,
and
stop
then
it.
when it says male and female, both male and female have souls, have both sides to them. And when we read that verse, even here, I mean, we didn't discuss the rest of it, but even here, the human being will try to relate to his or her own soul and understand how to apply that to their life.
Yes, absolutely. Especially there's a beautiful teaching from the Rebbe about the concept of ruling over the animals. And the Rebbe says that in every soul, all the 6 days of creation exist within every soul. So within your soul, you have the inanimate, you have the vegetation, you have the living, in other words, the animals, and you have the human being. If you want to go through it, your actions are like the inanimate. They're just actions. They don't have any life. That's like the stones, the inanimate material. Then you have vegetation. Vegetation is like emotion. Why is it like emotion? We can talk, really, I should talk about this for an hour. We don't have time. But emotion is the vegetation, and the intelligence is the animal. And the human is that the fact that a person could transcend even his own intelligence. And the purpose of creation, as described in verse 26, is that the aspect of your humanity should rule over all the other aspects. In other words, the human being that's within you should elevate and and give purpose to the action, to the emotion, and even to the intelligence. So it's not only referring to ruling over the world outside of you, but it means could you rule over the internal world? And as you know, it's much easier to rule over the world outside of you than to rule over the inner world. The inner world is much more complicated to take control of. There are people who can create companies and can create order in multi-billion-dollar industries, but within their own soul, within their own life, they can't create any order. They can't control their own demons. They can't control their own animals. And that's why, as you point out, Vicky, this verse has a double meaning. It refers to the world outside of you, but it also refers to all the components of the world that are within you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
And what
you.
about male and female side of a person? Do we
Yeah.
does every person has male and female
Yeah,
side?
according to the Kabbalah, every person has 10 sefirot. So just like God has the masculine and feminine aspects of through which He creates, even though God Himself is one and simple and undefined, but there's 10 ways the way God expresses Himself. Some of those are masculine and some of those are feminine. Within the person himself, there's the conflict between the masculine and the feminine. It's not a conflict; it's a tension. And we can go through all 10 sefirot to have some of them are masculine, some are feminine, some are giving, some are recipients, some are innovative, and some are know how to expand the existing idea. You can elaborate at great length, but yes, both aspects of masculine and feminine exist within the person, and within the person itself, you have to respect both elements. You have to give. You can't suppress any of those. You have to realize that they both create a wholesome human being. So
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It looks like it's a separate topic, but it's very
the problem with Genesis is everything we're going to say now we could speak about for an hour, because these are general. We're introducing the most general aspects of the creation of the human being. So everything we touch upon can be a 6-week course. But that's the problem. I guess the rest of the Torah will play it out, and we'll get all the additional insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, if anybody else wants to jump in, make a comment, ask a question, say a joke. I'm sorry I didn't say any jokes today. So if anybody else has a joke, now's a good time. Otherwise, we will, otherwise, what did I just do here? Otherwise, we'll resume next week. And we have the other classes this week. So I hope everybody has a good week and enjoyable day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Be well,
Rabbi.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a good day.